Continuing on with the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab Outstanding Guest Speaker Series, today we are pleased to present Jason Church. Jason is the Chief of Technical Services at the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training with the National Park Service. He divides his time between conducting in-house research, organizing various training events, and teaching hands-on conservation workshops. Since 2005, he has conducted more than 100 lectures and hands-on training for cemetery conservation. He earned his MFA in Historic Preservation from Savannah College of Art and Design and is a professional associate of the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works. Church is currently the Conservation Chair of the Association of Gravestone Studies. Today, Jason will present a virtual lecture on the introduction to cemetery preservation. This talk will cover the basics for cemetery documentation and headstone cleaning. So without further ado, I'd like to offer a warm virtual welcome to Jason.
Thank you very much. So I want to join the group now after hearing about all of the stuff you guys do. So I'll be honest. Until recently, I never did any genealogy research myself. I've always focused more on the above ground and the physical, tangible parts of historic preservation in cemeteries. But so yeah, I need to join your group to get some skill sets from you. Before I start, I want to I threw a couple of links in the chat already. I didn't even think about these. These are literally happening right now. We just did a webinar a couple weeks ago with the National Trust on ownership and permissions for historic cemeteries, and we're doing another one in a couple weeks about documentation, including doing tips for African American genealogy. So it should be a great webinar. I'm doing a very small part in the end about documentation tips. Some of that will be in this presentation, but that'll be a 3-part webinar series that I encourage all of you to check on those links and check out. So Suzanne, thank you for the introduction. As I said, my name is Jason Church. I'm with the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training. We are a research office of the National Park Service. We're located in Natchitoches, Louisiana, and we're a full National Park Service office. We don't look at fuzzy bears and bald eagles. We look at cultural materials. So we're broke up into different divisions: historic architecture, historic landscapes, archaeology, materials conservation, and technical services. So we have 6 research labs here in our facility where we actually do original research. And a lot of that, I oversee that research. And a lot of it is things like selecting the proper cleaners for government issued grave markers. That was a 5-year-long study we did in partnership with the VA. So that's a lot of the kind of research we do in-house, figuring out the right treatments for historic materials such as masonry used in cemeteries, that sort of thing. I have been doing this for a long time. So we're going to jump into, so what got me interested? Why do we care about historic cemeteries? And the reality is, it's for the future generations. My passion for this is knowing that what we do is going to maintain these cemeteries and help these cemeteries for the future, and helping get these, into, so they'll be around longer, that sort of thing. And of course, most of you, you're interested in this for genealogical information. And as you know, I'm not going to preach to the choir here, but as you know, this is the driving force behind cemetery preservation in the U.S. is this huge, emerging, just booming genealogy pastime that we have. And that's really, really what has pushed all of my lectures and all of our work, is really you, the genealogist, finding cemeteries that are abandoned, finding your own family members, just finding a nice space that you feel comfortable in. I can't tell you how many people I talk to who fall in love with cemeteries just because they went there and just they were at peace. They fell in love with the place and they started caring for it. So that's who comes to our lectures, that's who comes to our workshops. And a lot of that, in my opinion, is really, I'd say 90% of that being driven by the genealogists. So thank you. And thank you for your interest in cemeteries. So for me, this is what brought me to cemeteries. I was a stonemason. That's what my grandfather and his father did. I was a stonemason in the mountains of North Carolina, where I'm from. And I was really, really interested in historic works, historic buildings, historic sculpture, things like that. And that's really how I got interested in cemeteries, was the incredible amount of artistic sculpture that we own in cemeteries. I tell municipalities all the time that municipalities don't appreciate or recognize that they own this huge sculpture garden. Your town doesn't have the money to replicate the amount of sculpture they already have out in a public place. And that really is a public place that we can go and enjoy and really appreciate. I meet so many people who are bird watchers who fall in love with cemeteries, and people in cities to walk their dogs and to get out into a green space. It really is a massive sculpture garden that we really should appreciate and respect, and think about it, for that reason. The other thing that really drives me, I'm a huge fan of what we call vernacular markers. So these are homemade, handmade markers. And to me, these are really important and artistically and culturally super important. I think we overlook these a lot. People sort of want those high style, angels, the big sculptures, but we really need to consider and appreciate in our community sort of our homemade and handmade markers. So a lot of my research, I work with family members, I work with companies that do handmade markers. So I do a lot of work, interviews and oral histories, and going out and working with them and learning their techniques and photographing their process. It's a big part of what I like to do in my own personal research. So I think that's really important. And that really drives me as a conservator to be interested in historic cemeteries. Another thing, of course, important aspect for historic cemeteries is they record historical events. This is a monument that I worked on. This is the U.S. Arsenal explosion. It was the largest civilian casualties of the Civil War. And this is the monument to all of the mostly women and children who were working the factory who perished in that explosion. This is really important for us as historians who are interested in bringing school groups and kids and young people to cemeteries, because this is a tangible link to the past. This is not an abstract thing. This is the real monument that was put up for this event that really happened, for these people who really perished, who really were part of this story of America. And to me, that's a really important aspect of bringing people in and getting people interested in cemeteries. And also the personal stories. Who was this person? Boom, this is who they were. It's a thing, if you worked a lot with school groups, the way history is taught now, it's taught not chronologically anymore, it's taught in major chunks, but they move around depending on which school and which state and the curriculum and the guidelines. But a lot of times that history goes out of chronological order for students. So cemeteries are a really good place to put concrete, sometimes literally concrete dates and concrete events into those minds. And this is a great, I have done a lot of work in this cemetery. This is Chalmette National Cemetery. It's outside of New Orleans, so fairly close to where I am. So it's easy for me to work down there. And this is a great story. I love working with groups. We ran a volunteer month. We had about 700 volunteers, mostly students, high school students and college students, on what they now call alternative spring breaks. So we had about 700 volunteers that we ran through for a month. We've done it for 3 years. So you're looking at, a few thousand volunteers we've run through this cemetery. And this is a great way to show them that's who these people are. Let's all look up. And now with the beauty and the magic of the internet, most veterans, you can pull up their service records and you can find out when they served, where they signed up, lots of information. This is one of my favorite. This is Lyons Wakeman, or Sarah Rosette, as she was actually known. So this is a woman who chose the name Lyons. It's Sarah Rosette Wakeman, and she, bound herself, cut her hair, her brothers had all gone off to war, and she was at home trying to make ends meet and realized she could make a lot more money as a man than she could as a woman. So she wore her brother's clothes and started working as a midshipman, and heard about how much Union soldiers were getting paid and realized, forget this hard work as a Union, as a midshipman, I could join the military and make twice as much. So she joined the military and actually fought in quite a few battles and made it as a soldier for quite a while, before she was finally killed in battle. And that's when it was discovered that she was a woman. And she's buried at Chalmette National Cemetery. And the military chose to bury her as the soldier that she died as. And we know a lot about her because she kept a journal. So we have the diary that she kept through the war and the letters that she wrote back to her mother. And those are all published in a book. So if anybody's interested, this is a great book to read. Just look up Lyons Wakeman and you can find the book that was published of her journals. But real person, real events, real history. And also just walking around the cemetery to discover these fascinating stories of people that aren't famous. They don't have a book written about them, but now we know something about them. These are two just random photographs of my thousands. I have my collection of, this Sergeant Warren Brown. I mean, look how much we know about this person. Just literally a laundry list of accomplishments and how much they were loved. We have this whole poem written. And then over here, we have a trapeze artist. Would we have not known that? But they chose to, it was important enough. We have this awesome laser etched granite photograph of them as a trapeze artist from the circus. So just incredible stories just sitting out literally in the field waiting for us to discover them as historians. Just immense amounts of research that can be done. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about cemetery documentation. And I know I said I could take questions at any time, but I'm seeing that I think I'll have to take them at the end because I see this huge list of questions in the chat room, and I can't read that and answer. So I think I'll take that back and go and take questions at the end. So the importance of cemetery documentation. So what do we do and why do we do it? Okay. So one thing, there's a lot of survey, a lot of documentation we can do before or after at any point other than actually the transcriptions that we think so much of. And one is looking for primary resources. So our Victorians, we loved the cemeteries. There were postcards made, stereoscope cards made, actual tour guides made for a lot of big, important, especially the Victorian rule movement cemeteries. These were tourist attractions. I've got a collection of tour guides that were made for different cemeteries. Those tell us a lot about how the cemetery looked at that time. They tell us a lot about where the markers were, what markers were there, who's buried there. So great primary resources. Another thing is, historically, our family reunions were generally in cemeteries. We would go once a year to the cemetery to convene with our living loved ones there at the resting place of our loved ones who had passed, because a lot of times we had more people in the cemetery than we did, underground than we did above ground. So we would have these reunions at cemeteries. And a lot of times we find photographs in those. And these are some from my collection that I found just randomly at flea markets. And now with the beauty of the internet, you can actually go and find a grave. And I've Googled, I've searched all these people and find the photographs. This is a great example that one at the top, I bought those 30 years ago or more at a flea market in Delaware, and I actually went on Find a Grave recently, and it's amazing. There are no trees left in the cemetery. So just seeing as a conservator how physically the landscape of the cemetery has changed. The same with, she is sitting on a granite, what we call curbing. So she's sitting on this large granite curbing that would have denoted that family's burial. That's all gone. So this headstone is just sitting among many, many others with no other features around it, no trees, no curbing, any of that. So it's amazing to do that kind of research to see the change in the cemeteries. Oral histories, something that gets forgotten about a lot when we think about doing cemetery research. This is a great example. This is Miss Bertha Lee. We did oral histories with her, and she was actually able to tell us everyone in the cemetery, all of the unmarked burials, who they were and how they related to other people. So she's a genealogical gold mine of, well, I know who's buried here, and that's their uncle, that's their parents, able to tell us all that. And her children who went with us were just shocked that she knew all this. And I thought, well, no one's ever thought to ask her. And I thought, well, I've never even asked my own grandmother to go out to the cemetery with me. So it's something to think about. Former caretakers of cemeteries are great people to interview. And of course, just our elderly population, you know, what do they know that we've never thought to ask them? So oral histories can become a valuable lesson for documentation. So why do we even care? So what are we doing this for? Well, one of the reasons that we do it is to get account of the current condition. You know, what do we have out there? What does it need? What condition is it in? A very important thing that we need to look into for documentation is a record of existing materials. Now, I showed this as a sort of a worst case scenario. This is my really bad example. This is a cemetery that I was the caretaker for in Savannah. And this is a series of gates. Now, these gates came from a police arrest. A couple had a Ryder truck and this big black and white photography book called Cemeteries of the South. The couple was from New York City, and they had actually from New Jersey. They had come down from Newark in this Ryder truck and were visiting all of the cemeteries in this book and then robbing them. And their end goal was to take all of this back up to one of the design marts in New York to sell it. So they were caught, they were arrested, and they took a plea bargain to return materials. Well, unfortunately, when I was the caretaker of the cemetery, we had this pile of gates, and we started going through and realized those gates didn't actually belong to us. We have no idea where they belong. We don't know where they go. And that really made us realize that we actually had no record of what gates and fences we actually owned. And this was a 120-acre cemetery laid out in 1852 and 1872, and no record of what we owned. So we went in, we surveyed over 500 fences and photographed them and wrote down how many pieces and mapped them and all that. So an important thing, I hear people all the time say, well, we had bronze vases or bronze markers and they were stolen. And we told the police, the first thing the police are going to ask you is, do you have a photograph of that? The answer is no, that it's gone, because even if they get a bronze vase, they're not going to give it to you if you can't prove that was yours. So it's important to have a record of existing materials. It also helps us to establish preservation priorities. So what's more important, the one that's the mausoleum that's actively moving, that's actively coming down, or the one that has already lost its crenellation, that's already laying on the ground, it's not moving any longer? But just knowing the condition of these things to start to prioritize, start looking for grants, or when volunteers come around or you have work days, sort of knowing what needs to be done. All right, so with electronic databases, we're doing a lot of stuff just with Google Forms now, but there's lots of forms out there. There's no reason to write your own. They're easily available. Here's a couple different places you can get them. So pretty easy to find. But coming up with the form is not the important part. Picking a form and deciding this is what you're going to use for documentation is easy. When I was just in Alabama last week, the state of Alabama has its own form. So we use that state form that goes into a state repository, a state database. So look to see if forms like that are available. A lot of states now have their own. I know I've done a lot of work with Texas recently. They have their own state forms. I know Utah now has their own state forms. Not sure about Nevada, but definitely look into it and use those forms. The form itself isn't important. It's really knowing what's on it. I'll mention that again in a second. But this is something that can easily be done with the community. This is not something you really need to hire people for, and or even something that you should toil at and take years to do. Documenting a cemetery is fun, it's easy, and you can get big groups to do it. This is definitely something you can call for volunteers, get creative with it. Boy Scouts are always looking for projects. Girl Scouts are always looking for projects. Now all fraternities and sororities are listed as service organizations, so they need service hours. Once you get involved with a local college with a fraternity or sorority, I have found that most of the time they just call me every year. Hey, we need hours. What can we do this year? If you've got veterans or a veterans burial in your cemetery, National Guard will come out. Local military bases will come out. We've done a lot of work with local military bases, especially the Navy and the Marines. I've worked with huge groups of them before, and most of the time their commanding officers will assign them PT. So this is part of physical training for them to work in the cemetery and move stones and that sort of thing. So we've had huge volunteer days. We had 400 and some volunteers come and clean at Stones River National Cemetery. We had 300 and some this year in Vicksburg come out. So it's something, if you get creative, you can get large groups to come out and do a lot of help you with documentation. So the most important thing when you're documenting is trying to decide, we have all these definitions on here. What do they mean? So earlier, Suzanne mentioned a ledger. Great example. In this top photograph right here, you can see ledgers in this cemetery. That's the important thing is, maybe looking at your sheet, making a little definition sheet, doing a little PowerPoint, maybe one night or the morning before an event to say, all right, everyone, this is what a ledger is. So when you're writing it down, this is what a headstone is. This is what a footstone is. That may sound silly, but I've worked at several sites where they didn't explain to the volunteers the difference in a headstone and a footstone. So we'd go out to a lot, we'd look at the survey and go, well, it says 24 people are buried here. I only see 12 graves. And you realize, oh, they listed every footstone as another headstone, so another burial. So just a real simple explaining to people, what these things mean goes a long way. One thing that gets overlooked, very important for us as historians and genealogists, these are funeral home plaques. If you're not familiar with a funeral home plaque, this is put out by the funeral home. Usually has either movable letters or a piece of paper that goes behind it. The white one is a much older one that you see in this photograph, and that was written on with like a China marker. And the information's written on, it's put at the end, at the coffin after the funeral. That is designed for the monument maker to come back when he places the headstone. He pulls that funeral home plaque out, throws it in the back of his truck. When he gets enough of them, he takes them back to the funeral home. They reuse them. The problem with that is if no one comes to put a headstone up, these now become permanent record. These become the permanent marker. So you see poor Mr. Herman here, that plaque has been there since 1967. So that plaque has survived all this time. That is Herman's permanent marker at this point. So really, really important that we photograph these, really important that we document these before they're gone. All right, so documentation. So there's a lot, this is a lot going on in this headstone. This is a concrete marker. We've got this great little ornamentation. We've got this great ground glass that's been pushed into the as pigment to colorize it. Just really gorgeous. Yes, this is the information genealogically about Lewis Hampton, but that's not what we want to write. We know that Lewis Hampton lived a much fuller life and had more to say than the days he came and the days he left. So we really want to transcribe all of it because it tells us more about who he was. And this is an acceptable form of transcription. If it's capitalized, we keep it capitalized. The backslash denotes a new line. So this is one way. This is sort of the most commonly accepted way to transcribe. Like I said earlier, I do a lot of work with vernacular markers. If it's misspelled, leave it misspelled, but note that it's misspelled. If the letters are backwards, if it's some random letters that don't make any sense, don't take them off, leave them on your survey, leave them in your documentation, because those become important as well. It tells us about that stone. And of course, here's another one of those funeral home plaques. This is just a piece of paper under a piece of glass, and it has been there in that cemetery since 1958. So how that has survived is a mystery in itself, but this is really the marker for Willie Redding Jr. So document this, super important. I encourage everyone, if they get a chance, add your stuff to Find a Grave. Share this around. As you do documentation, give it to the local genealogy library. I talk to a lot of people who say, well, I did all this hard work. These are my documents. I'm going to keep these. Please, I encourage everyone to share the wealth, share this work that you're doing for others to know it. So Find a Grave is a great example. Printing everything and giving it to your local genealogy room of the library is a great thing. So another thing to look at when you're doing documentation is the iconography. It tells us more about how that person lived. Were they part of a profession? Were they part of a club? Were they part of a fraternal organization, a religious order? Any of those things adds more information about that person. So make sure you photograph that, make sure you write that down. And also, as a conservator, I love to see all of the other elements that make up a historic fabric of a cemetery. It's not just about headstones. There's a whole historic fabric to the cemetery. So document the coping and the cribbing and the curbing and the fences and the furniture and the urns. All these become super important to make up the historic nature and character of our site. So we want to document those as well. And sometimes they're have burial information on them. All right. Site maps. So lots of programs out there now on how to make maps, lots of online databases and things like that. So they can be super simple or super complex. The sky's the limit as far as mapping. You can have something as complex as this. This is done with a robotics total station. This is an interactive GIS map. Every grave you click on brings up the burial information, brings up their property records, all these things that were done in a city. It could be that complex, or it could be something as simple as you sketched out where everything is in relationship to each other. Both perfectly acceptable, perfectly, it's what we're looking for, just so that documentation exists. Photography, talk more about that in a second, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. We definitely want close-ups of the epitaph, the memorial, any iconography, but also a few that are taken from farther away so that we can see where everything is in relationship to each other. So you're doing photographs, there's a lot of genealogy clubs and websites out there that encourage some things that as conservators we're not big fans of, and that is using shaving cream or flour or chalk. And the way people do these, the lower is off of a website. So they've sprayed shaving cream on it, then they've squeegeed it off, and that leaves this white in all the letters, and it makes it easier to photograph. Unfortunately, what it also does is it allows the stone to absorb the aloe, the tannin, the lanolin, all of the fats and oils that are in that shaving cream gets absorbed into the stone. It doesn't work if the stone's wet, so the stone has to be dry. It really soaks all this up. Even if you wash it afterwards, all that's really gone into the pore structure, and it'll slowly come out, and it makes a very sticky surface. And as it makes this sticky surface, all the mold spores and everything and pollen that blows by in the wind will get stuck to it. And what you get is what you see here in this cemetery in Galveston, right behind a genealogist. You get blooms of biological growth on all of the epitaph and burial information. So not big fans of that. Of course, one of the beautiful things with photography now, I tell people, feel free to play with the filters that are on your phone. You have this wide range of filters. If you don't know how to use them, ask some grandkid or some young kid how to use the filters on your phone. And other than the funny things of all of a sudden you have dog ears, there's lots of filters that actually work really well for us. Changes the color, flips them, inverts them, things like that. We can read a lot from taking a photograph and then playing on our iPhone to see the filters. Another good example is using mirrors to reflect back to get a better light on it. Some people use the very cheap mirrors that are made to go on the back of doors. Those work great. But also what works great is just the folding pop-up mirrors. That's what I keep with me. You can buy them from photography supply catalogs, or you can actually just buy them from the automotive supply companies to put in your front windshields. Those work great. All right. So another thing that works really great is you have to go out at dusk, or at least a very overcast day where it's dark. Your phone doesn't work for this. You have to have a real flashlight, but shining, raking light over the epitaph will pick up shadowing in the letters. So this works really well. I carry a work light with me, and it's a good way to document a lot of the carvings and a lot of the epitaphs that are on. Last thing with documentation is, document if it was painted. A lot of grave markers, like Miss Bradley's here, had painted epitaphs at one point in their life. And it's okay if we were coming back once a year to our family reunion, we would repaint that epitaph. So we're all good. We don't come back for a few years, someone dies off, the epitaph goes away very quickly, and now we have this beautiful concrete marker someone's made with no information on it. And we find that a lot. I'm sure many of you who've done work have found ledgers and burials and headstones that have nothing on them. And you think, why would you go through all this effort? You've made this and you didn't even put a name on it. It was painted on originally, and it's just worn off. So important to photograph that and to note it. All right. So what if you're working with a cemetery that looks like this? You're in good shape. A lot of times plants were used as grave markers. So this was a common practice. Early on, pioneers used it a lot. A lot of slave cemeteries are marked this way. A lot of early African-American cemeteries are marked this way. But a lot of early pioneer cemeteries, if you were really fighting and hoping just to make it through the winter, then carving an elaborate headstone probably wasn't your priority. So a lot of times plants were put down. Another example. Also, unconventional grave markers. Sometimes people will say, oh, there's trash all in the cemetery. Could be trash. Be careful. It could be grave markers. The photograph of this rusty piece here, that's an axle out of a Ford tractor. I did an interview with a family, and they said, no one really had money to put up a headstone for their dad, so they took a part out of his shop and sunk it in the cemetery so they would know where he was. And now that has become the grave marker. They all know what it is and who he is, and they haven't lost him. So one thing that we can also do with photographs is note when we have pieces that we need to be careful of and really document, broken pieces, fallen pieces, because things like that top of that marker that says at rest, that's going to be in somebody's garden in no time if we're not careful with keeping an eye on it. Basically, I'll skip over that. So, again, researching who they are. This is, I won't preach to the choir. This is what you guys love to do, but finding out more about those people. All right, so we can take a quick break if you like, and I'm going to hit some of these questions before I move on.
Yeah, I see a few of them in the chat box, like Bill in Maryland.
Okay. Okay, so I know Natchitoches has a great historic past, but how or why did the research get located there? Well, Bill, if you want to know the honest truth, Congress had a committee that decided that the National Center was needed, that most European countries already had such things and America did not. And it was a senior senator that headed up the committee when they elected that in Congress that we needed to exist. That person handed it off to another senior senator and sort of tasked them with, all right, now it's your job to get this going. And that senator's name was J. Bennett Johnson, and he was from Louisiana, and his wife is from Natchitoches, and she went to college at Northwestern State University of Louisiana. So he wrote into the bill that we had to exist in Louisiana on the campus of NSU, his wife's alma mater. So we are located here because it was written into a congressional bill. So that is how we made it here. How do you find the organization or person responsible for the cemetery when you do not know the area? Great question. So the reality is, that's a hard one. Go to the local library in the town, go to the genealogy room, ask them, see if anyone knows. It's a good chance someone has already been doing research or has some connection to that cemetery. I have in the past wanted to work or seen something in a cemetery that I wanted to discuss with someone. I've left an envelope, put it in a Ziploc bag, hang it on the fence, and say, to the cemetery caretaker on it. And I've gotten calls back that way to say, oh, hey, I saw your note. What did you want? Or, I usually say what I want in it actually, but I'll write a note and hang it on the fence in a Ziploc. That's one option. But a lot of times going to the local genealogy society really helps. And of course, if it's attached to a church or if it's been owned by the municipality, that's pretty easy. So even if it's owned by a church, but it's out and there's no church visible, then find another church in the immediate area. If it's a Catholic church, find the local diocese. If it's a Baptist church, find the next closest Baptist church to it. Ask them. A lot of times the church that was associated with it is gone and they have inherited the care. So that's another easy way to find sort of who cares, especially for church cemeteries. All right, so let's talk a little bit about cemetery care. So this is again something that I'm going to show you guys for the do's and don't basics for cleaning. This is definitely something that can be done with volunteers again. I've done this with lots of youth groups. They love it. I've done it with lots of volunteers, thousands and thousands of volunteers over the years. So it's a fun activity, gets people really involved. People love it, gives them that instant gratification of I did something, look at me, I really made a difference. Sorry, my thing didn't want to move. All right. First thing we got to think of is why are we cleaning this monument? What's on it? And that's going to matter how we get it off. So most of the time, why we clean is to read it. Readability is our number one reason. We want to read it. We want to transcribe it. We want to get the genealogical information off of it. Cleaning helps with that. This is a great example. This is a stone I picked in a class to clean just because I really liked the lichens that were on it. I thought, oh, these will be really pretty when they come off. I had no idea how much was written on this stone because it was essentially unreadable. Now, I didn't change the stone in any way. I didn't make it the lettering deeper or change that. It was just the visual impression being broken up by those lichens. Once those were removed, boom, we could read it again. And I always love this one because it's in memory of Edward C., son of, and it tells our little genealogical information, where they were born, when they were born. But more interesting, died on March 30th, 1846, occasioned by the kick of a horse. So this poor kid got kicked by a horse and died. But all that was visible after we cleaned it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that's biological cleaning. Talk about that in just a second. So maybe it's just dirt on it. Maybe all we need is some water. A lot of people use what's called Orvis. It's a horse soap. It's very inexpensive. That's really good for just getting dirt off. Kodak Photo Flow, which is getting harder to find. Historically, that's what a lot of us used. And that's, again, just what it had, just dirt splashed up on it, maybe mud on it, that sort of thing. Comes off real easily. Now, if you do have more permanent staining, like this copper staining and metal staining, this is not something we're going to get off in a few minutes. This is something you need to call a professional. But know that those stains most likely aren't doing any damage. They're just aesthetic. But this is where we'd want to call a professional in. Same thing I recommend if you have graffiti and vandalism. Graffiti, for me, you go out, you photograph it, you call the police. I generally do not recommend calling the local newspaper because what we get is, call the police, let the police do their jobs, let the police help you with this. But usually calling the newspaper, especially now, if it's just someone tagged, like our person here, the Big Show, this is just a tag. That's one thing, but a lot of times what we see is either it's hate motivated, either religiously or racially, but it's generally hate motivated. And we know statistically we get more copycat crimes after it's been on the news. Some jerk sitting back there, he's done this, or they've done this. Now it's on the news. Some other person sitting back is like, I feel that way too. I'm going to go do it so my message gets on the news. So usually generally recommend photograph it, call the police, let them do their job. And then I would call a professional conservator to talk about the best ways to remove paint from stone. And this is not something I generally recommend people try themselves because we end up repairing a lot of damage done by people trying to get it off than it would have been just to have it done the right way the first time. So I know in Nevada, I've worked in Virginia City and a few other sites. You don't see this, but most places in the country, what we see the biggest issue is biological growth, and we're removing biological growth. That's what is obscuring our stones. That's what's darkening them or making them unreadable. And for biological growth, what we recommend is a cleaner called D2. That's like David 2. So D2, it's a cleaner that is a detergent. It has it'll suds, it'll remove soiling, it'll remove the dirt, it'll remove insect waste and bird droppings, that sort of thing. But it has an additive in it to kill biological growth. So in using it, that biological growth is going to go away and it's going to stay off for a long period of time with this cleaner. So that's what we recommend for most cleaning is D2. And it has nothing in it that will harm the stone in any way. So we use that a lot. So what do we need to consider when we're cleaning? So we want to do things that aren't going to harm the stone in any way. We don't want to do any of the unacceptable methods that would harm our stone. So Never use any wire brushes. We never use Nylox brushes. For those who don't know, wire brushes and Nylox. So Nylox is they're nylon, but they're impregnated with diamond. These are made to strip paint from metal. No power equipment. So I get a lot of questions now. Well, it's a soft brush on my drill. You don't have any way to control how hard you're pressing or how much pressure you're putting on that stone. So I recommend no power equipment of any kind. Here's a good example, well, not a good example, here's a bad example. This is an obelisk where they've cleaned the top part, and they've actually cleaned the headstone behind that too, the white one. But they hadn't gotten to the bottom part yet. But if you look, this was cleaned with a wire brush on a drill. But if you look closely, what you see is just millions of circular scratch marks. Well, in reality, not only have you eroded the stone, so you've done 100, 150 years worth of natural erosion, so that's bad. But equally important is you've now created a bigger surface area on that stone than you had before. So it's actually going to get dirty faster than it did the first time. So what happens a lot of times is you have well-meaning people who use wire brushes and Nylox brushes, and they leave a surface like this. Well, of course, the stone gets dirty really quickly again, and then they have to come back. Well, then in a year, the stone gets dirty again. They have to come back. And what they eventually end up doing is wearing the stone away to almost nothing. And this will happen, and I get a lot of people who tell me, well, it was an old stone. It was really weathered. Maybe that's the case, but it's never as weathered as what you turned it into by doing this. No pressure washing. Anything over about 500 psi, you can actually carve into marble. Most pressure washers are 3,500 psi, 2,800, 3,500 psi. So that's thousands over pounds per square inch that we would want to use. So it actually does damage like this. It actually cuts into and scars the monument. So definitely we don't recommend any pressure washing. No bleach, no strong acids or bases. This is a good example. This is a stone that was just bleached regularly by the family. What happens with bleach, and it's easy to do if anyone wants to try it, pour a little bleach into a clear glass jar, set it up on the windowsill, sun heats it up, liquids evaporate, and you'll get crystals that grow behind. Those are chlorine crystals. Those chlorine crystals will grow inside the stone, and that pushes the stone apart. It breaks that matrix up. It starts to dislodge those stones, the grains of the stone. All right. So we want to make sure whatever we choose isn't going to do any harm. We want to do the simplest, least invasive methods. We want to follow manufacturer's safety recommendations, of course. So we select our equipment. I prefer natural bristle soft brushes. My rule is if you would wash the hood of your car with it, you're good to use it in the cemetery. I like natural bristle better than nylon, only for the fact that as nylon wears and the bristle gets shorter, it gets stiffer. Natural, as it gets shorter, they stay the same, and they actually outlast nylon. They'll actually last longer. All right. So our basics for cleaning is to follow the manufacturer's recommendations. We use a soft bristle brush. I like my nylon brushes. My natural bristle brushes. We don't use power tools. We don't use wire brushes, no sandblasters, no grinders, anything like that. We get the stone really wet. Now, getting it really wet brings back another question. What if you're at a site that doesn't have water? And most of the ones we work at don't have water. It's easy. You can bring it in buckets. You can bring it in jugs. I save all the cat litter jugs. I save the juice jugs, things like that. I put water in them. Another thing you can do is you can clean when you know it's going to rain that day, or if it's rained the day before. I know plenty of people who actually wait till it's raining and they go out and clean. So all of these are options. And generally, small circular motion, we clean from the bottom, we work up, and we use lots of water to rinse. Already included that with you. And that's pretty much it. So really simple. We have videos on how to clean on our website. We have lots of videos and information. This is our website that's specifically about cemetery conservations. We have articles on there. We have webinars. We have videos that are recorded. So a lot of information on there. And if you see something on there that you're looking for, if you don't see something on there, rather, that you're looking for, drop me an email. I'll be happy to make a new video or to point you in the direction of what you're looking for.
Jason, would you mind showing us your website and kind of helping us navigate it?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. So one last thing, this is if anyone here is so inclined as on social media, this is our Instagram page. We post constantly. I was just in the cemetery last week, so we posted pictures of us out there cleaning and things like that. So we post all of our projects and all of our work. We try to post daily on Instagram. All right, and this is me. If anybody needs me, feel free to contact me. We're your tax dollars at work. So I'm happy to help. I will pre-warn you. I travel a lot, and I can get up to, I've got 100 emails in a day, just cemetery questions. So I will get back with you. Sometimes a little longer than you think it will be, but I promise I'm happy to help. All right, so all right, question became, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. Let me pull up our website. So we have lots of stuff on our website. So this is the root of our website. You can, hit the home button and go back to it. We have a regular podcast series, comes out twice a month on different, we interview people, authors, researchers, all kinds of stuff. So wide range of stuff on our website, but back to what we're talking about today. This is sort of the cemetery conservation stuff. So articles about it, videos about it. We have a course, and it's broke down into ethics, master planning, overview, documentation, landscapes, safety, and then moving more into like cleaning, lime wash, monument moving, fence work, that sort of thing. So yeah, wide range of information on there, on our website. So feel free to go on there and play around. Hopefully something is of use to you. All right. And that is it for me.
Okay, we got a few questions in the chat box. Let's see here.
Okay.
I wrote, let's see here. On the why clean stone slide that you were showing, what materials did you use to clean that stone? Was it just D2?
It was just D2 and water. That's it.
Amazing.
Yeah. And one thing I didn't mention, I should have, I apologize. One thing when using D2, it's a biocide, so it's killing that biological growth. That stone that I showed you that we cleaned for the readability. So that was before and after, maybe an hour or two after. So one thing to be careful with a biocide is a lot of times people will clean, they'll step back and go, it looks okay, I want to clean it again. Don't. Clean it once and quit. The cleaner has done its work. It will continue to lighten over weeks, over months. And the reason is it's not bleaching the stone. It's not changing the color of the stone in any way. What you're doing is, if you picture back to my stone with the biological growth on it, we're scrubbing with our stone, with our brush rather. We're scrubbing with our brush. It's kind of like mowing the grass. We're mowing our yard, but we still have a root system in there. But we've poisoned it now with the biocide. So that root system, we can't get that out. We don't want to get that out. The only thing that would get that out would damage the stone. So what we want to do is spray our cleaner on. We do our scrubbing. We spray our cleaner on. We let it sit for about 10 minutes. We do our scrubbing. We rinse it off, and then we just quit. And what'll happen is you have poisoned that biofilm, mildew, mold, algae, lichen, all of that. And the roots are still in it, so the stone will still be dark. It'll still be gray or beige. Over the next few weeks, as the root system starts to shrivel up and the sun comes out and the rain and the dew, that wetting drying will actually work out the roots, and it keeps getting lighter and lighter. And I've had people say, well, it's changing the stone. No, you're losing that biomass. You're losing that root system from it, and you're getting back down to the stone itself. So it'll continue to lighten. So I always recommend, it's always going to look a lot better, in a few minutes, but I always recommend to wait. You'll see how much lighter it'll get in the next few weeks. So don't keep cleaning.
Jason, I have a question. Let me just share my screen for a second. I
Mhm.
want to share. This is my great grandmother's gravestone in North Dakota.
Yeah.
Can you see? I noticed a lot of the examples you were using were like concrete looking materials, but I think this is something like granite or another material. I'm not sure.
This is granite. This is actually a North Dakota granite.
Oh, okay. Now, is that just regular lichen that D2 would work on?
Absolutely. So that's just lichen. That would come off very quickly. But yeah, that's a North Dakota granite, North Dakota red. And yeah, D2 would be perfect to take that off.
Okay, thank you. Next time, because I do go there every few years, and I do plan on using D2 the next time I go. I just wanted to make sure it was the correct material.
So someone asked, how often do you clean? Well, that's a good question. It really depends on a lot of things. So if a stone's under a tree, if it's in an area that floods, things like that. But generally speaking, once we've cleaned it with D2, it's usually good for a few years. I'd say 2-3 years before we need to clean it again. There are, of course, exceptions. Like at Chalmette, we clean once a year and they're pretty dirty, but they actually sit in water year round. So water is constantly wicking through them. The stones stay wet. I've had stones in the sun without a tree over them that had no visible growth for 5 years. So it changes. So Betty asked, how long did it take you to clean that stone? That stone, maybe 2 minutes. Now, well, I should take it back. So realistically, about 15 minutes. So I get it wet. I let the water dry a little bit so it's not pooled on it anymore. I spray my D2 on it. I let it sit for about 10 or 15 minutes just sitting there. I'll go work on another one. So it's kind of like if you think about cleaning your bathroom, our cleaner has a little time icon on it. You got to let it sit and dwell. Then I'll come back and I'll scrub it and I'll rinse it. But the actual scrubbing and rinsing, maybe 2 minutes, maybe on a stone that size. So Rebecca asked, will D2 kill plant material in the vicinity? No, it will not. No, it's not made for the higher order plants. It's only made for that sort of biological growth. There are a few grasses. I've never seen it myself, but I've been told there's a few grasses that it shocks. So it'll actually turn brown for a few days, but they come back. But I've never had any trouble with it killing flowers at all.
Jason, what about Windex? If it's not a really badly, let's say it's a newer stone and you just want to kind of like clean it up and make it shine a little bit, if there's like a little dust on it, is Windex safe to use?
I would not. So ammonia will actually etch into like marble, and that's the basis for Windex. So yeah, I would stay away from that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And now I assume since you said the North Dakota granite is safe to use just like it is on concrete. What about marble? Is marble safe to use D2 on as well?
Yes. Oh yeah. It was actually designed for marble originally. So it has a pH of 9, which is the same pH of marble and limestone. That's actually what it was designed for, but it'll work on any masonry. I actually clean my house with it. I have a house that has vinyl siding, but I live under some very large live oak trees. And I used to, every spring, I would pressure wash my house until my wife, who's smarter than me, one day said, why don't you just spray it with D2? You have all that out in the garage. And so I sprayed it with D2, and it takes about 3 years before I have to clean it again. I don't pressure wash it ever anymore. After about 3 years, I just spray it again. I don't even scrub it. I just spray it and leave it. It kills everything on my vinyl siding. Yeah, it's safe to use on limestone. It's safe to use on all stone, all masonry. It's safe to use on wood. It's safe to use on metals. Safe on vinyl siding. It's safe on fiberglass. I've not seen anything that I wouldn't recommend using it on.
I have a question while I'm waiting for other questions to come in from the class. On the personal story slide, I noticed that for Lyons Wakeman, there was a number 4066 on. That's a Civil War grave, correct?
Correct. That's the burial number.
Oh, burial number. The reason I was asking is because I just looked at my Civil War ancestor who's buried in North Dakota, and he did not have a number on it. He has the Civil War stone, but there's no number on the top like Lyons Wakeman.
Yeah, so that is a stone in a national cemetery. So all national cemeteries have a burial number on them. That's how they're recorded.
Oh, I see. Now I understand, because he's not in a national cemetery. He's in a private cemetery. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Let's see here. Hold on. Class, you want to unmute your microphone and ask Jason any questions directly?
Yeah.
While we're waiting for more questions to come in, can we talk a little bit? Do you have any experience in relocating cemeteries and the conservation issues associated with that?
Sure. I have never relocated one myself, but I have worked with lots of archaeologists who have. So yeah, generally, so a lot of times, a cemetery will be relocated because of highway expansion, or occasionally, some sort of public structure that's being built. And so what they have to do is their best faith effort to remove the burials. Now, of course, as we know, there's not a lot generally left from the burials. It's not like the movies that, we dig up a full skeleton that's laying there. There's usually just bits and pieces. So they'll screen it. They'll make their best faith effort to remove everything. That usually gets sealed in on a metal box. How big depends on how much was found. And then we usually map the cemetery, and then that's moved somewhere. Maybe it's moved a few hundred yards out from where the highway is going, or maybe it's moved into another cemetery. So maybe there's a bigger public cemetery near, so they'll move that whole lot. And they're supposed to put them back exactly like we find them. So they'll lay out the same cemetery just in a different location. So we'll map them beforehand to see, the distance they all are, and then we'll put the remains back with the grave that was found closest to it. And if there was no headstone, it just goes back in relationship to where the other ones were. They don't do genealogy or DNA to figure out who they are. They just make that best faith effort and put them back in relationship to everything else.
Yes, as progress happens, and land becomes scarcer and scarcer in many cities, this is something that, just since I've been doing genealogy in the past 20 some odd years, 2 family members have been relocated. So, it's happening, at least it seems to me, maybe anecdotal, but it seems to me it's happening more and more and more.
Sure. And sometimes if there aren't any markers, so there's maybe no headstones, they'll have to legally run an ad. And if no one, after 60 days or whatever, if no one comes forward saying, hey, I know about that cemetery, then what they'll do is generally they'll put them all together and bury them in a single grave and just say, this is the remains of 22 unmarked graves from this location.
I have a question. I think that it's limestone, the grave's headstone that I'm thinking of. And of course, the lettering is disappearing. There's nothing you can do about that, right? It's just going to fade away.
It is. There are treatments. So we strongly advise against sealers or waterproofing agents or anything like that. They just cause more trouble down the line. They're never going to solve your problem. There are chemicals called consolidants that will help bind the stone and slow down the weathering. But in reality, unless it's something just really important, we rarely do it because they're very costly. I think the last time I worked on one, it was for the VA. I think the consolidant we used was $500 a gallon.
Oh my.
So it's rarely done. So unfortunately, there's really nothing we can do. An alternative would be to, photograph it really well, and eventually, if it gets so it's unreadable, going to a monument shop and trying to have it replicated is about the best solution.
Yeah, I did that for one, and I just thought, well, maybe there's an easier solution. But so I had it
Unfortunately, no.
replicated. And the question I then have is, if one arrives at cemetery with your cleaning products, do you need to let someone know that you're coming in? And
Absolutely. Yeah, so there's no good cemetery, the Good Samaritan rule in cemeteries. You should have permission. Now, if it's your direct family and you know it, and you can, you've got that, this is my uncle, then generally you're good to go. But if it's just a grave that you're interested in and you're thinking, gosh, this really needs to be cleaned, you should get permission. Generally, most cemeteries are okay with it as long as you tell them what you're using and what you're doing. If you ever meet anyone who is cleaning but they won't tell you what they're using, that's not a very ethical person, and I would not work with them or have anything to do with that project. I run across that sometimes. But generally speaking, yes, you should have permission. You should talk to someone to say, hey, and I personally, I've cleaned very distant relatives, still last name of church, but we were pretty far removed. I usually tell someone, I'll usually contact the church or something and say, hi, I do this professionally. This is who I am. You can Google me. Here's my business card. I'm related to these people. Would you mind if I cleaned them?
yeah, there's
Never had
usually a
anybody tell me
caretaker.
no.
Yeah, there's usually a caretaker that's responsible.
Yeah.
And that would probably be the one you would go to then. They would then say, okay. I mean,
Yes.
this caretaker. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
And Jason, I think Karen has a question in the chat box.
Oh, yeah. So your great parents were relocated, their headstones were replaced with very small ones. Oh, that's unfortunate. Usually they just they use the same headstone. So sorry about that.
You had mentioned about taking pictures of the grave and kind of showing landmarks around. That's been my practice. I've been a Find a Grave photo volunteer for many years now.
Nice.
And whenever I do a photograph, I try to, if it's at all possible, to include landmarks in the picture.
Yes, very important.
One time I was visiting the cemetery where my mother is buried, and I noticed that there was a woman walking around with a clipboard. And I asked her, I just said, what you doing? And she says, well, I work with the Historical Society, and we are going through and recording all the graves in the cemetery to make sure that, 100 years from now, they will still be there. And then I found out later on that there is an issue with that particular cemetery. Well, I think the issue has been resolved in the last couple of years, but there was an issue with that cemetery reselling plots. And that, I think that was probably the true reason that she was there doing the work she was doing. But unfortunately, there are some unscrupulous cemeteries.
Well, and that's become a big thing. A lot of cemeteries I've worked with will come out and do a ground penetrating radar of areas where they suspect no one's buried, and for the purpose of reselling lots. And if it's done correctly and they've done the research and they don't find anyone there, it's a good way for the cemetery to bring money back in, which helps in the preservation efforts. But yes, unscrupulous, we definitely want to avoid.
You had mentioned that in certain circumstances you have to find a professional cleaner. Where would one go about finding a professional cleaner?
So what I would recommend is, I'll put it, let me find it, and I'll put it in the chat room. So professional conservators are a member of a group called AIC. So the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works is our professional service organization. And on their website, which I'm finding real quick for you, on their website, they have, let me find, they have a find a conservator.
Would you
And
mind
you can,
sharing the screen with that, since we're recording?
oh, sure. Share my screen. Yep. So it's the American Institute for Conservation, and it's right here. It's find a professional. And you can go through and look for professional members. It'll ask you where you live. It'll ask you what you're looking for. Yeah. So you can kind of go here. Let's say we'll do a local search. And then what are we looking for? You can look for archaeologist or architecture. Let's see. Generally, it'll be here. You're looking for someone who works with sculpture. You want outdoor sculpture, by the way. It's very different than, working on the statue of David versus the angel that's been, graffitied out in the cemetery. But so you want to find outdoor sculpture, and then in your area. And there's lots of things for all of you if you're interested. If you've got questions with, we've got bricks and ceramics and stone and metals, so you can choose all of those things. But also, if you've got questions about grandma's quilt, this is a great place to find people. If you're trying to figure out how to, mend a rip in a painting that you've inherited, this is where you can go. This is our professional organization for conservators.
Wonderful. Now I have a few more questions, but I wanted to open the floor to the class. Class, do you have any questions for Jason?
Sue, this is Wendy. And Jason, I really enjoyed your presentation. It's been great. And the quilt, I'm looking at those, and I have some oval pictures. The oval with where it kind of pops out in the front, that they've been broken the center, the conservation. But the quilts was the one that I want to do my husband's one. So my question is this: I've been my daughter and I took a college trip and went through the Midwest, and we went through Nebraska and Kansas and stopped at the two places where our family lives. And what I noticed in the cemeteries, that the parents' names would be on the front, husband and wife's name. And then on the back of the stone, it would say parents of Sally, Johnny, and Tommy, right? It would have those names on the back. And so I thought that was, I don't know if that's a Midwest thing or what that is, but my grandparents died in Oregon, and I didn't know about kind of that tradition. So we didn't do anything like that on my grandparents' stone. I was wondering, my grandparents' stone, do I own that stone? So for example, if I wanted to put a plaque on their headstone to say, that they were the parents of my father and grandparents of, could I do that?
Generally speaking, yes. I would still talk to the cemetery and say, hey, this is who I am. I'd like to do this. But yeah, generally you shouldn't have any problems with that.
Right. Have you seen that in other states, or is that just a Kansas, a Midwest thing where they put, parents of so-and-so? And
I have definitely seen that. Not real common though. Yeah.
I mean, in these cemeteries, it was like, oh yeah, okay, now I know how I'm related, So it was actually kind of fun. It was like a tree right there, a genealogy tree on the headstone. So
I've actually seen that. I've seen stones that have full trees made out on them. I love it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jason.
Any other questions? Unmute your microphone and ask Jason directly.
Oh, I guess I have one other question. I have I found someone that I found it in Find a Grave, and we know that the husband's there. I'm guessing that the wife's there. but it looked like it had been really grown over, and I think it's on somebody's farm. So I mean, again, yes, we have to, ask the farmer if we can get access, but is there any other, things that we should consider when we're trying to find those kind of headstones that are out in somebody's farm field, because that's just what they used to do?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I would recommend that first link I put in the website in the chat. That webinar we just did is actually, that's the entire webinar is about, is that legal issue of permission for trespassing and permission to visit. So I would recommend checking that out. There's some professional lawyers on there talking about our rights and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I chimed in a little bit late today, so.
Oh,
but-
no worries. It's
Yeah.
in the chat room. It's the very first thing in the chat room.
Okay, and then you were also talking about how do you find, who the sexton was or who has the records. And so I was trying to find one of my great grandfathers for my Mayflower descendant line. And everybody says, oh, well, he's buried in Wynette, Kansas in the cemetery. And so I thought, well, I'm going to find the cemetery. And so I ended up, you could, on the internet, you could find like who was in charge of it and the person, and he ends up being a banker at one of the local banks who has the book in the vault that says where everybody's buried. And he was the nicest man. I reached out to him, and he even went and walked the cemetery. He couldn't find the headstone either. So I just thought to add that in. So sometimes it is published who you reach out just on the internet. So, but he was a kind soul. So, yeah.
Nice.
Jason, you were talking about homemade markers. I must say that the homemade markers you showed in your slides were considerably better than the homemade markers I've seen in some cemeteries, which are nothing more than a piece of cement with looks like they wrote with a stick in the cement, the person's
Sure.
name.
Yeah, I could have given the whole hour and a half on just homemade markers I've worked on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fact. I mean, when I was looking at those, I thought, wow, those are almost look professional. I mean, I've got my father's family is buried in one cemetery in Arkansas, and I've seen pictures on Find the Grave, and they literally look like nothing more than a piece of cement, like poured into the earth with a stick writing the person's name. It's not even straight. The writing's not even straight.
It may have actually very well have been just that.
Amazing. Now, what do you do with the situation? I don't even know if you can answer this, but what do you do with the situation where, let's say you have a newspaper article that says somebody was buried someplace, but the cemetery says they have no record of it?
I don't know what to do with that either. I know that happens. I have seen that myself. And they could have been buried and there's just no record left. I know, cemeteries, it comes and goes depending on who the sexton was at the time. Sometimes really great records and sometimes not so great. I've worked at plenty of sites, worked at one where, they hired someone who was related to someone to be the sexton for a while. And the rumor was they were illiterate, but they were hired because they were the brother of someone. And so for like a 20-year period, there's no records. So there's really nothing we can do about that. So.
Yeah, I've gone round and round with one cemetery in South Dakota where my grandmother's supposed to be, and they have a record of my grandfather, but the newspaper article when she died said that she's buried there, but the cemetery says no, she's not.
So I have time for one more question, then I'm gonna have to sign off.
Okay, I'll open that up to the class.
What's that?
I'll let the class take that last question.
Oh, anybody else?
Okay.
Well, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. You've got my information. We're connected now, so feel free to reach out if you ever need anything.
Well, thank you, Jason, and it's been a pleasure, hosting you today. And I would like to invite you back again if your schedule permits in the future. Well,
maybe next time I can come out in person. We can do a hands-on cleaning workshop or something.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Absolutely. I will work with you on that. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. Like I said, I've done a bunch of work in Virginia City. But Reno would be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And we have one member who is Frances Tyron, and she has been in charge of the restoration of the Hillside Cemetery, which is the historic cemetery in Reno. So that would be the perfect place to do it.
Very cool.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll see you again soon.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.